The history of organised crime in Italy tells us that the Camorra was formally dissolved in 1915, as well as, until the end of the Second World War, there were no structured groups able to hinder the power and the ideology presented by Benito Mussolini, who finally came to power in 1925. There are those who affirm that the Camorra at the time of the fascist regime did not exist. But is this really true? Let's dive in to understand what the situation really was. Certainly, it wasn't possible for a criminal group to succeed in reaching an agreement with a political system that professed maximum law and order. Now, it must be understood that in order to obtain the complete control of the country, fascism in Italy started violent and repressive action against whoever it considered dangerous. Mussolini several times addressed the issue of Italian criminal organisations, and he did everything he could to eradicate what he thought was a potential enemy hidden in his own house. And in a certain sense, fascism succeeded, and the Camorra and the other mafias kept a low profile until they almost disappeared. And this is an argument that we elaborate also on in our videos on the history of the Sicilian Mafia. I will link the video in the description below so you can check it out later. Now, many decided to emigrate and try their luck abroad. Several Camorrists came to Brooklyn in New York and managed to create a solid and powerful network that made them, again, masters in a foreign territory. Some returned after the war and the fall of the regime, while others decided to stay to create what we've all seen in terrific movies such as The Godfather and others. Yet, despite the aggressive manoeuvres of the fascist government, the Camorra didn't die out, but came back stronger than before. How come? What happened, or didn't happen, during that period that allowed the criminal organisations to survive? The Cuoccolo trial was a turning point in the history of the Camorra. From that moment on, the organised crime located in the Campania region began to crumble, and the Great War certainly didn't help their business, so much so that on the 25th of May 1915, the Camorrist Gaetano del Giudice called a meeting of affiliates and decreed the dissolution of Camorra. In the same period, a precise ideology was beginning to consolidate, carried out by a charismatic figure and well aware of the Italian situation, Benito Mussolini. Fascism began to establish itself in the country between 1919 and 22, and it was composed of individuals ready to do anything to gain power and eliminate political opponents and parties different from those professed. A violent dictatorship was rising along the peninsula. Violence was a visiting card of the party of the future Duce. But not only. It was the awareness by Italians that the country was in trouble that led Mussolini to conquer the country both ideologically and concretely. Now, initially, fascism sought the support of bosses because the party needed unscrupulous individuals capable of creating terror and repressing any form of protest, such as, for example, workers' protests. Mussolini needed brutality. The Camorrists, who'd been using it as an effective tool for a long time, were the best allies around. So at first, it seemed that the mafia and fascism were following the same path arm in arm. Yet everything changed at a certain point. Having risen to the top, the Duce now had a consolidated influence and couldn't allow potentially dangerous groups to escape his control. The fascist regime was structured in such a way that all power was in the hands of the dictator and could not afford to offer favours or allow criminal organisations to infiltrate politics and expand their influence on society. So it was that after the alliance came the time for repression, and the Camorra was unable to counter this wave of suppressive violence. Fascism imposed itself first in the northern part of Italy and arrived only later in the southern regions. Naples, however, was a special case. In fact, it was here that the nascent movement was more embraced, to the point that in 1922, between Via Medina and Piazza del Plebiscito, took place the simulation of the March on Rome. Naples was the symbolic city of the south of Italy and was in a disastrous political and social situation. The Cuoccolo trial and the Sarredo inquiry had created a huge discontent amongst the population, tired of living in a place plagued by corruption. Benito Mussolini, through his representatives in the territory, took advantage of this discontent of the population to impose a new ideology, as well as to commence fighting against Camorra, a very unpopular crime organisation in Naples. Now at the time, Camorra was almost completely disbanded and only a small bunch of criminals were active and remained mainly isolated. Mussolini understood that it was the right moment to strike against Camorra, also in order to stamp a massive visibility and publicity for his own regime. Mussolini's intent, in fact, was to pretend that Camorra was still powerful and strong, but his ruthless law and order approach scored an incredible victory. And so, therefore, the Neapolitan Camorra affiliates were at a crossroads. Either they would have suffered full destruction from fascism, or they'd have to emigrate overseas. Now, several chose the latter option, and those who left for America in search of fortune paved the way for Italian criminality in the United States. Those few who decided to stay in order to survive decided to join the ranks of the new regime. However, not everyone was welcome inside the ruling party. Several former affiliates of Camorra who joined the Fascist Party were removed, arrested or eliminated, since they were considered hardcore, and their living philosophy didn't match with the values of fascism. Several members of Mussolini's party realised that the vast majority of those former Camorra affiliates joined the party only as a way to escape destruction or arrest. At the end of the day, the result for several ex-Camorra members wasn't different from that expected before joining the party, and this move sadly proved to be a mistake for them. One of the most active members of the Fascist Party in Naples was Vincenzo Anceschi, nicknamed Iron Man of Fascism. Now, Anceschi was a carabinieri with full and unlimited powers. He harshly repressed the Camorra in Naples, forcing it to sink. The violent suppression carried out by Mussolini succeeded in making organised crime in Naples almost completely disappear. But careful, we said almost. As a matter of fact, the Camorra did come back and reimpose itself on the territory of Naples following the fall of the fascist regime. So, at this point, we should ask ourselves a few questions. If the Camorra was on its knees, how did it manage to come back and re-establish itself? Those hardcore affiliates who didn't decide to leave or join the party, how did they survive and where? Well, first of all, the Camorra disappeared in Naples and its surrounding territory. However, at the same time, the Camorra phenomenon began to expand in the provinces of Campania region. Repression, after all, was concentrated in the city, and this allowed the Camorra to regroup in Caserta, for example, to develop an ever wider criminal network based on fruit and vegetable markets and buffaloes. The second reason is related to what the fascist regime failed to do. Now, despite the apparent cancellation of crime, the party didn't implement a programme of literacy, employment and resolution of the problems of the people of Campania. In short, it didn't solve the problem at its roots. Now, several areas of Campania remained in absolute poverty during the fascist regime, and a large portion of the population was completely forgotten and received no benefit. And of course, those areas were a breeding ground for the Camorra and a vast pool of potential affiliates. The words of Carabinieri Anceschi reflect well what would happen in the future. We have eliminated the Mazzoni criminals, that's the term which the Camorrists were defined as. But at this point, we must intervene on the territory. We must build roads, schools, a water network, give employment to the people, because otherwise the phenomenon will reproduce itself. None of this happened, and Anceschi's statement became prophetic. The Camorra returned, reorganised, and became stronger than before. So what happened next? Well, keep tuned to the channel for more. And in the meantime, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you soon.